All right, so you guys wanted to take a deep dive into the life of Michael Singh. It's a name that you might not immediately recognize,
Yeah.
but trust me, his story is anything but ordinary.
Yeah.
We're going to try to unpack this biography, really piece it together from little bits of information here and there, like Wikipedia, some old newspaper articles,
Yeah.
that sort of thing,
Right.
and try to figure out just who he was and how he ended up on such a dark and fascinating path.
Yeah.
Almost like true crime, but with a lot more going on beneath the surface.
What really struck me right off the bat was this constant reinvention, like
Yeah.
from the very beginning.
Yeah.
It seems like he was trying to outrun his past.
Oh, absolutely. Born Rupert Sookman in Trinidad and Tobago
Yeah.
back in 1945. We don't know a whole lot about his early life,
Right.
but what we do know is this really kind of intriguing trail. Teacher, soldier in Vietnam, businessman,
Mhm.
and then boom, name change, relocation to Los Angeles.
Like what was that about?
Oh, no. What was he running from? Or running to?
Right, exactly.
What do you make of those career jumps? Especially that stint in Vietnam.
It's hard to say for sure, but war changes people.
Oh, yeah.
It leaves a mark, you know? It wouldn't surprise me if that experience, the trauma, the displacement, all of that,
Yeah.
maybe that played a role in, his actions later in life.
It makes you wonder if those early years were more about searching for a place to belong,
Yeah,
a way to escape something that he couldn't outrun,
totally. Trying to find himself, maybe.
possibly.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings us to 1975
Hmm.
and the first truly chilling chapter of his story,
Right.
the murder of 16-year-old Candace Lynn Starr.
It gets dark.
It does. Their relationship, if you can even call it that, was really intense
Yeah.
and just riddled with violence from Singh right from the start.
It's just the speed at which that violence escalated.
I know.
It wasn't just arguments, it was control, manipulation. This terrifying level of possessiveness.
Hmm.
I mean, the sources, they describe Candace's sisters actually witnessing the kidnapping,
Oh, wow.
Singh holding her hostage for days.
Oh my gosh. Can you imagine
Yeah.
seeing your sister taken, knowing she's in danger,
Oh, it's just...
and you're powerless to stop it?
Horrific.
It's awful.
And then comes the final act. The shooting at a convenience store in Gallup, New Mexico. It's almost too brutal to really even comprehend.
Right.
But here's where it gets even more unsettling. Despite witnesses, a partial description of Singh, the case goes cold. For decades.
Whoa.
It wasn't until 2009, thanks to advancements in DNA technology,
Right?
that Candace was finally identified, and the pieces connected back to Singh.
Justice delayed, but not denied, I guess. It
Yeah.
makes you think about all those years in between, What was going through his mind knowing that he had gotten away with murder?
Yeah, was this a turning point?
Right.
A confirmation that he could escape the consequences of his actions?
Exactly.
Or was it just the beginning of a much darker descent?
Yeah. Or was it both?
It's a question that kind of haunts me, too. And unfortunately, as we move on to Springfield, Missouri, it seems like that question gets an answer.
Uh-oh.
We find Singh remarried to Mary Ann Spain,
Mm.
mother of two.
Okay.
And almost immediately, that pattern of violence, that need for control,
Oh, no.
it rears its ugly head again.
The cycle continues.
It's like a terrible echo of what happened with Candace.
Right.
But this time, the outcome is even more devastating.
Yeah.
It's like he was just incapable of breaking free from this cycle of violence.
That's what it seems like. Those sources on Marianne, they paint a picture of a woman just trapped in this terrifying situation,
Yeah.
trying to protect herself and her children.
So on September 23, 1976, Mary Ann is shot and killed outside of her own home. Her children, just imagine, they witnessed the entire thing.
Oh, God, that's just...
I can't even begin to fathom the trauma of that moment. And the sources don't go into detail about their psychological states afterwards.
Right.
But you have to wonder about the long-term impact.
Of course. Yeah.
The scars that something like that leaves behind.
Yeah, it's almost too painful to think about.
It is.
But it's also a part of the story that we can't ignore.
Yeah.
It's a reminder of the ripple effects of violence, how
Right.
it just shatters not just one life, but entire families,
Absolutely.
entire communities.
It's incredibly sobering. And this time, there's no escape for Singh. He's captured quickly and awaits trial for Mary's murder. It's in those details, those seemingly insignificant moments,
Yeah.
where we start to see the real complexity of his character.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, like the fact that he specifically requests a vegetarian diet in prison.
Really?
What do you make of that?
I don't know. Is it a genuine moral conviction? Some strange power play? Or just a way to, control the little that he has left in his situation?
I don't know. It's such a bizarre detail.
Yeah, it's
It's
weird.
one of those things that really sticks with you.
Yeah.
Almost like this keyhole glimpse into a mind that we might never fully understand.
Right.
But thankfully, the trial itself offers us a bit more insight. A chance to see how he operates under pressure.
Right.
The courtroom becomes a stage for him. Outbursts, delays, even trying to flip the script, claiming that Marianne was the aggressor.
Oh.
He's fighting tooth and nail to control the narrative,
Right.
to paint himself as a victim.
Wow.
But then you have the testimony of Marianne's children,
Mm.
especially her daughter.
Oh, God.
It's heartbreaking, but it's also incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
They present this raw, unflinching account of the violence that just permeated their lives, directly contradicting Singh's carefully constructed facade.
It's hard to imagine what that must have been like
It's unimaginable.
for those kids to have to go through that.
I know.
Yeah.
So those testimonies, they must have been incredibly difficult to hear,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
especially for the jury.
Right.
You have this clash of narratives, the manipulative charm of a man desperate to escape consequences,
Yeah.
and then the stark truth. Spoken by children who have lost their mother.
It's heartbreaking.
Ultimately, the jury finds Singh guilty. But there's a twist, right?
What's that?
He's convicted of manslaughter, not murder, and sentenced to just 10 years.
Oh, wow. That seems light.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Feels like a slap on the wrist. Especially considering the gravity of his actions,
Yeah.
the pattern that we've already seen.
Right.
Do you think that the jury was swayed by his performance?
It's possible.
Yeah. His attempts to manipulate their perception.
Yeah, maybe. It's hard to say for sure, but
It's hard to say, but it definitely raises questions about whether true justice was served, about whether the legal system adequately grasped the danger that he posed.
right.
And as we'll see, that question becomes even more relevant as his story unfolds.
Oh, boy.
What we see next is almost unbelievable. A few years into his sentence, Singh gets another chance,
Okay.
a chance at redemption,
All right.
a chance to break the cycle. But instead, he chooses a path that leads to even greater darkness.
Wow. What happens?
You're talking about his marriage to Susan Irving, right?
Well, he's on work release.
While he's on work release, it's almost like he's taunting fate at this point.
Yeah, seriously.
And the most chilling part is that history repeats itself. Domestic violence charges filed by Susan. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
Oh, no.
You know where it's headed,
Right.
but you can't stop it.
It's awful.
And then in May 1982, he escapes work release, abducts Susan, and brutally murders her near Camden Point. The way he tried to bury her body, the interruption by police, it's almost farcical.
Wow.
If it weren't for the horrifying reality of what happened.
So they caught him burying the body.
Well, yeah, they were responding to a completely unrelated call
Oh, wow.
and just stumbled upon him.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
It's like a scene from a dark comedy.
Yeah.
Guess there's nothing funny about it.
No, not at all.
This escape, the murder, it all suggests a level of premeditation,
Right.
of cold calculation.
Yeah.
That clashes sharply with the manslaughter conviction from his previous trial.
Absolutely.
And yet, as we'll see in the next part of our deep dive, his story takes another unexpected turn. The insanity plea enters the picture.
Oh, wow.
And we're left grappling with even more questions about who Michael Singh really was.
It's a wild ride, isn't it?
Oh, it is. Buckle up,
Yeah.
because it only gets more intense from here.
Huh.
We left off with Singh's escape, another murder, just a whole lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah.
That's almost hard to believe that this is all one man's life, you know.
Right.
But the insanity plea that he enters during his trial for Susan's murder adds this whole new layer of complexity.
Yeah, it's a really interesting turn, legally and psychologically. On the surface, claiming insanity seems completely at odds with what we saw. The premeditation
Yeah.
in Susan's murder,
Yeah.
the escape, the abduction, even the attempted burial. It all points to this level of planning
Yeah.
that's hard to reconcile with some, sudden mental break.
Right. It makes you wonder if this was a genuine reflection of his mental state.
Right.
Or just a calculated move to avoid any serious consequences.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Was he truly mentally ill, or was this just a brilliant legal tactic?
I mean, it's impossible to say for sure, obviously, without, a thorough psychological evaluation, which we don't have access to.
Yeah.
But what we can do is kind of consider the broader context.
Right.
We know he had a history of trauma,
Yeah.
the war, the constant reinvention.
Mm-hmm.
Could those experiences have contributed to some form of mental instability?
Right.
Or are we seeing like a manipulative personality just kind of exploiting the legal system?
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces are missing.
Totally.
We have these glimpses into his past, these bursts of violence, but no clear picture of what was happening inside his mind.
Well, and that's where things get really interesting, right? Because if we look at the pattern of his relationships,
Mm-hmm.
the escalating violence, the need for control, it raises some questions about personality disorders.
Okay.
Specifically, antisocial personality disorder.
So help me understand that connection.
Sure.
What would point to something like that?
Okay.
How would that explain his actions?
Well, people with antisocial personality disorder often they display a disregard for social norms, a lack of empathy, and a tendency to manipulate others. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see how those traits would fit with what we know about Singh, the way he manipulated Marianne,
Yeah.
the complete lack of remorse for his actions.
Exactly.
But wouldn't a personality disorder have been apparent earlier in life? Why wouldn't it have been a factor in his previous trials?
That's a great question. It's possible the disorder was always present,
Okay.
but maybe it just became more pronounced over time,
Okay.
fueled by the trauma that he experienced,
Right.
or maybe even a sense of empowerment from getting away with murder.
Oh.
Or maybe it was always there,
Yeah.
lurking beneath the surface. And the legal system just failed to recognize it.
So we have this possible combination of factors: trauma, a potential personality disorder, and a legal system that might have just completely missed the mark.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unravel.
It really is. And it reminds us that there's rarely like a single clear-cut answer when it comes to understand human behavior, right?
Rarely.
Especially in extreme cases like this. We're not dealing with, simple categories of good and evil. We're dealing with like the messy reality of human psychology, where nature and nurture intertwine in these very complex ways.
Yeah. So the insanity plea works. He's found not guilty
Mm-hmm.
and sent to the Fulton Medical Clinic instead of prison.
Okay.
But even in confinement, his story doesn't end quietly.
Oh, no. What
He's
happened?
killed by a fellow inmate in 2005. It's a brutal end to an already violent life.
It's a chilling conclusion for sure.
Yeah.
It makes you think about, was justice ever really served? I mean, did the insanity plea, even if it was genuine, did it allow him to kind of escape true accountability for all the pain that he caused?
It's a tough question,
Mm-hmm.
and one that probably doesn't have, a satisfying answer.
Right.
But I think it's important to remember that while we've been focused on Michael Singh,
Right.
on trying to understand his motives and actions,
Yeah.
there are other stories here, stories that often get lost in the shadow of the perpetrator.
The victims.
You're talking about the victims, their families, the people whose lives were just shattered by his violence.
Right.
We can't let their stories be forgotten.
Absolutely. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the psychological puzzle, the legal maneuvering. But, at the end of the day, we have to remember the human cost. Candace Starr, Marianne Spain, Susan Irving, these women weren't just names in a case file.
Right.
They were daughters, sisters, mothers.
Yeah.
Their families had to live with the aftermath, the grief, the unanswered questions.
It's a stark reminder that these aren't just abstract cases we're discussing. These are real lives,
Yeah.
real tragedies with ripple effects that extend far beyond the courtroom.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another, really crucial question.
Okay.
What can we learn from Michael Singh's story?
Right.
Can we identify warning signs, intervene earlier, and prevent future tragedies like this?
I mean, it feels like such a massive, complex issue. Where do we even begin to address something like this?
Yeah.
I mean, are there things that we can do on an individual level to make a difference?
I think awareness is a good starting point.
Right.
Understanding the dynamics of domestic violence, recognizing the red flags.
Yeah.
Those are crucial first steps.
Yeah.
But we also need to create a culture where people feel empowered to speak up, to intervene, to offer support.
So being more attuned to those subtle signs,
Okay.
having those uncomfortable conversations, being willing to step in when something feels wrong,
Yes.
those things can actually make a difference.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just about calling the police,
Mm.
or relying on law enforcement. It's about creating a network of support,
Yeah.
a community where violence just isn't tolerated.
So what I'm hearing is that this isn't just an issue for, therapists or lawmakers.
Right.
This is something we all have a responsibility to address.
Exactly. We all have a role to play in creating a safer world. And I think part of that is being willing to engage with these difficult stories,
Yeah.
to learn from them, and to use that knowledge to make a positive impact.
It's a powerful message. So as we move into the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
let's shift our focus from understanding Michael Singh to understanding what we can do,
Mm-hmm.
individually and collectively, to prevent future tragedies like this. We spent a lot of time trying to understand Michael Singh,
Right.
his motives, his psychology.
Yeah.
But as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking about all the what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
What if someone had intervened earlier?
Right.
What if the system had recognized the danger that he posed?
Yeah.
Could any of this have been prevented?
It's the question that haunts, every case like this.
Yeah.
And while we can't change the past, I do think exploring those what ifs can be really valuable.
Okay.
It helps us understand where we might have missed opportunities, how we can improve our responses to domestic violence,
Right.
how we can, build a more preventative approach.
So instead of just focusing on punishment after the fact,
Yeah.
we should be looking for ways to identify potential abusers,
Yeah.
to support victims,
Absolutely.
to create a culture that doesn't tolerate violence. But where do we even begin? I mean, it feels like such a massive societal problem.
It is a massive problem,
Yeah.
but it's not insurmountable.
Okay.
And I think, you're right. It starts with shifting our focus. Instead of just reacting to violence, we need to be proactive.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what does that look like in practice?
Right.
What are some, concrete steps that we can take?
Well, education is huge. We need to teach young people about healthy relationships,
Yeah.
about consent, about recognizing the signs of abuse. We need to equip them with the knowledge and skills to build respectful, equitable relationships, from the start.
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
It's not just about waiting for something bad to happen
Right.
and then intervening.
Right.
It's about laying the groundwork for a culture where violence isn't even an option.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And alongside education, we need robust support systems for victims.
Okay.
So that means, accessible resources, shelters, hotlines, counseling services. It also means creating a legal and social environment where victims feel safe to come forward,
Yeah.
where they're believed and supported, not, blamed or shamed.
That's a crucial point. I've read stories about, victims who were afraid to report abuse,
Right.
who didn't trust the system, or who were worried about, the consequences for themselves or their families.
Mm-hmm.
We need to change that narrative.
Absolutely. Reporting abuse should be met with compassion and action,
Yeah.
not, judgment or disbelief.
Right.
And that goes for everyone,
Yeah.
not just, law enforcement or social workers.
Right.
We all have a responsibility to create a culture where victims feel empowered to speak up.
So what you're saying is that preventing violence isn't just about changing laws or policies.
Right.
It's about changing our attitudes,
Exactly.
our beliefs, the way we respond to these situations. It's about building a community of support.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's about recognizing that this isn't someone else's problem.
Yeah.
It's a collective issue. It requires a collective response.
It's a powerful message. And it makes me think about, the families of Michael Singh's victims.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the pain, the grief, the anger
It's unimaginable.
that they've had to endure.
Yeah, their stories are a constant reminder
Okay.
of the just devastating impact of violence. And while we can't bring back their loved ones, we can honor their memories by working to prevent future tragedies.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the life of Michael Singh,
Yeah.
I'm left with this sense of responsibility, this urge to do something to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to our listeners who are feeling the same way?
Yeah.
Where can they go to learn more, to get involved, to be part of the solution?
There are so many incredible organizations doing amazing work in this field. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is a great resource
Okay.
for anyone experiencing abuse or anyone who knows someone who might be in danger.
Yeah.
There are also, local shelters, support groups, advocacy organizations that can, provide guidance and assistance.
And I think it's important to remember that even, small actions can make a difference.
Absolutely.
Educating yourself, talking to your friends and family, being an active bystander,
Yes.
donating to a worthy cause. These are all ways to contribute to a culture of peace and respect.
I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah.
This isn't a problem with easy answers, but it is a problem that we can tackle together
Right.
by raising awareness, by supporting victims, by challenging harmful attitudes and behaviors. You know, we can create a world where violence is no longer the norm,
Yeah.
but the exception,
It's a hopeful message,
Yeah.
and one that I think we all need to hear.
for sure.
Thank you for guiding us through this deep dive, for sharing your insights, and for reminding us that we all have a role to play in creating a safer, more compassionate world.
Thanks for having me.